The HOA was building a hotel on my land, right over the memorial orchard I planted for my late wife. The board president, Connie, just smirked, waving a piece of paper with my signature forged on it, claiming I had donated the property. She hit me with thousands in fines and turned my neighbors against me, thinking I was just some old Marine they could bully into silence. But while they were busy pouring concrete, they had no idea they were making a fatal mistake. They picked a fight with a man who owns a demolition company. Where are you watching this from? Let me know in the comments, because you're about to see justice served with dynamite. And if you believe homeowners should have the power to fight back against a corrupt HOA, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the moment they get exactly what they deserve. It started with a sound that didn't belong. Not the chirping of the finches or the rustle of the oak leaves, but the low, guttural rumble of a diesel engine, followed by the high-pitched beep, beep, beep of a truck in reverse. It was 7 in the morning on a Tuesday, too early for that kind of noise. I pulled on my boots, my gut tightening just a little. I've spent enough time around heavy machinery to know the sound of work, and that work was happening way too close to my back fence. Or what used to be my back fence. When I stepped out onto the porch with a mug of black coffee in my hand, I saw it. The fence was gone. Not just a section, the entire 100-yard stretch of split rail that separated my property from the community land was just gone. In its place was a sea of churned-up red mud, deep tire tracks, and a crew of 4 guys in hard hats wrestling with wooden forms for pouring concrete. They were a good 50 feet inside my property line, right where Mary's orchard used to be. My heart hammered against my ribs, a cold, sick feeling spreading through my chest. The apple trees, the pear trees, the single cherry tree she'd babied for 3 years before it finally gave us fruit. All of it gone. Leveled. Nothing left but dirt and splintered stumps. I walked toward them, my coffee forgotten in my hand. My steps were measured, my hands loose at my sides. You learn in the Marines not to charge into a situation until you know the terrain. A foreman, a thick-set guy with a sunburnt neck and a tablet in his hand, saw me coming. He held up a hand. "Morning. Bit of a mess, I know. We'll have it cleaned up." His voice was casual, like he was telling me the mail was running late. "You're on my land," I said. The words came out flat, devoid of emotion. It's a trick you learn when the alternative is letting the anger take over completely. He glanced at his tablet, swiped a finger across the screen. "Says here this is HOA community land, phase 1 of the new Haverford Lodge amenity project." I stared at him. "The what?" He sighed, annoyed at having to explain. "The clubhouse. Guest suites for visitors. Big project. It's all approved." I pointed to the old survey stake, half buried in the mud but still visible. It was a solid piece of iron my grandfather had driven into the ground himself 60 years ago. "That stake marks the corner of my property. My deed is filed with the county. You are 54 feet inside my line." I didn't have to guess the distance. I knew every inch of this land. He shrugged, the universal gesture for, "Not my problem." "Look, buddy, I just follow the plans I'm given. You got an issue, you got to take it up with your HOA. As if summoned by his words, a pristine white sedan pulled up along the access road. Connie Haverford got out, clipboard in hand. She had her concerned community leader face on, a practiced mask of syrupy sympathy that never quite reached her eyes. Connie had been running the HOA for 5 years, turning our quiet neighborhood into her personal fiefdom with a stream of night-picky violations and smug newsletters. "Jack," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "I heard there was some confusion. Let me assure you, everything is in order." She walked right past me, onto my land, and smiled at the foreman. "Excellent progress, gentlemen." She then turned back to me, tapping her clipboard. "Jack, I believe you'll find you signed a community easement for this back acre years ago. A donation for the betterment of the community. We have your signature on file." The world seemed to slow down. A donation. She said it like she was talking about me, giving a few old books to the library, not bulldozing my wife's memorial. "I never signed any easement," I said, my voice dangerously low. "I would never, ever sign away this piece of land." Her smile tightened. It was a predator's smile, all teeth and no warmth. "Oh, I think you'll find you did. It was all very public. We're building a beautiful facility here. It'll raise everyone's property values." She was talking about money. I was standing on the grave of my wife's favorite place on earth, and she was talking about property values. I spent the next 2 days in a cold fury. I went to the county records office and pulled the original deed. I paid a fee to get a copy of the easement Connie's HOA had on file. The signature on their document was a clumsy, almost insulting forgery. The loop on the J's was all wrong, the H too sharp. It was a child's attempt at tracing. Armed with proof, I filed a formal complaint. I attached copies of the real deed, the forged document, and a sworn statement. I expected a call, an investigation, maybe even a sheepish apology. What I got was a certified letter a week later. It was a fine, $4,300. The reason cited was aggressive behavior and threatening a board member. The board member was Connie, apparently telling her she was using a forged document to steal my land now counted as a threat. The letter was signed by the entire HOA board. Unanimous. That was the moment everything shifted. I stood there on my porch, looking at the letter in one hand and the concrete forms on my land in the other. They were already pouring the foundation. I realized this wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a misunderstanding or a paperwork error. This was a deliberate, calculated theft. Connie and her board of yes men weren't going to be beaten with logic or proof or the law. They didn't care about the truth. They had power, or what passed for it in this little kingdom of theirs, and they intended to use it. They thought I was just an old man, a quiet widower they could roll over. They thought they could erase my wife's memory for a hotel and send me a bill for complaining about it. They saw a victim. They had no idea they were looking at a man who spent 20 years in the Marines clearing unexploded bombs from hostile territory. They had no idea that when the rules are rigged, I know how to make my own. I looked at the raw, violated earth, and the anger inside me cooled, hardening into something else, something solid and clear. This wasn't a dispute anymore. It was a war, and they had just fired the first shot, not knowing I was already planning how to end it. The old Jack, the one who believed in a fair shake and honest mistakes, died on the porch that afternoon, holding that fine. In his place was someone else, someone colder, more patient. The man who came back from the service, the demolition expert. I didn't get angry, I got quiet. The first thing you learn in a war you can't see is to map the battlefield. My war started in my study with a fresh legal pad and a pen. I documented everything, the date of the fine, the amount, the ridiculous reason. I took a high-resolution photo of the forged easement, zooming in on the shaky signature. I started keeping a log. Every conversation, every interaction, every new piece of equipment that rolled onto my land was written down with the time and date. I bought a small, high-quality drone, nothing fancy, just a consumer model with a good camera. Every morning at dawn and every evening at dusk, I sent it up. I took geotagged photos and video, documenting their progress foot by foot. The footage was clinical, emotionless. Here is the rebar cage for the foundation, laid 12 feet inside my surveyed property line. Here is the concrete truck, its chute pouring gray sludge over the roots of my wife's favorite apple tree. This wasn't for them, this was for later. The HOA board, drunk on their initial victory, doubled down. Another letter arrived a week later. A new fine, this time for an unapproved aerial device flying over community property. $2,000. They were watching me. Then another, for my grass being 2 inches too high along the driveway. $500. It was a war of 1,000 cuts, designed to bleed me dry and wear me down. The construction accelerated. Trucks came and went at all hours, their engines roaring, their backup alarms piercing the quiet I used to cherish. The foremen started showing up with official-looking permits from the city, slapping them on the temporary fencing they had erected. I knew the permits had to be based on their fraudulent property claim, but they had a stamp on them. To the rest of the world, it all looked legitimate. Connie Haverford had woven a web of paperwork that was as strong as steel. To fight it head-on was a fool's errand. I was just one man. They were an institution with a lawyer on retainer. My daughter Laura saw the change in me. She'd come over for dinner, and I'd be staring out the window, my jaw set. The stack of fines on my desk grew thicker. "Dad, please," she begged one night, her voice tight with worry. "This isn't worth it. They have lawyers. They can take the house. We can move. We can plant another orchard somewhere else." She was a trauma nurse. Her whole life was about stopping the bleeding, about de-escalating, finding a way to make things safe. She couldn't see that for me. Safety wasn't an option anymore. This was my home. This was Mary's home. Running that wasn't in my vocabulary. "They're not just taking land, honey," I told her quietly. "They're trying to erase her." Laura didn't understand. She saw a fight over dirt and money. I saw a desecration. She finally stopped coming over, afraid of what they might do. She'd call, but her voice was strained. I couldn't blame her. The chill from my own daughter was nothing compared to the freeze from the neighborhood. My neighbors, people I'd shared a beer with over the fence for 20 years, suddenly couldn't meet my eye. Bob from across the street, who used to borrow my post hole digger, now hurried inside when he saw my truck pull in. Whispers followed me when I checked my mail. I found out from the mailman, a good kid named Sam, that the HOA had been sending out special security bulletins. They were spreading lies. They told everyone I was unstable, that I was a disgruntled veteran with a grudge. The most poisonous lie was the one they built around my business. They claimed I was hoarding explosives on my property, twisting my professional life into something sinister. They were painting me as a threat, a danger to the very community they were supposedly protecting. It was brilliant in a sick sort of way. By making everyone afraid of me, they ensured no one would ever listen to my side of the story. I was completely alone, surrounded on all sides. It felt familiar. It felt like walking into a town in a foreign country, where you don't speak the language and every smile might be hiding a threat. In the service, my specialty was explosive ordnance disposal. We'd go into hostile territory, find the things designed to kill us, and make them safe. Or, if we couldn't make them safe, we'd make them go away. The job required patience. It required you to see the world not as it is, but as a system of interconnected parts, wires, triggers, pressure plates. You learn to ignore the noise, the threats, the fear, and just focus on the mechanics of the problem. After the work was done, after the blast, we never stuck around for applause. We just left, quietly. One night, long after the work crews had gone home, I drove my truck out to the construction site. It was after midnight, the moon hidden behind a thick blanket of clouds. I cut the engine and just sat there in the dark, staring at what they had built. The foundation was fully cured. The first floor frame was already going up, a skeleton of 2x4s reaching into the night sky. They were building their monument to greed right on top of my heart. They had their permits, their lawyers, their campaign of lies. They thought their fortress of paper and concrete was impenetrable. I got out of the truck and walked to the edge of the muddy ground, the smell of fresh-cut pine and damp earth filling the air. I looked at the structure. It was just wood and nails and concrete, sitting on land that didn't belong to them. It was an unauthorized object in a hostile area, and I knew exactly what you do with those. I stood there in the silence, a cold calm washing over me, and I whispered the words into the darkness, making a promise to my wife and to myself. You built this on my land, so I'll decide how it ends. Wars aren't won with emotion. They're won with intelligence, superior positioning, and decisive force. My first move was to call in a favor from a man who knew the terrain better than anyone. Mick Alvarez and I went back 30 years to a dusty landscape where we learned to trust each other's instincts. Now, he was a senior inspector for the city, a man who had spent 2 decades navigating the labyrinth of permits, zoning laws, and public records. We met at a Greasy Spoon diner halfway between his office and my house. The coffee was burnt, but the privacy was perfect. I laid it all out on the Formica tabletop, the deed, the forged easement, the stack of fines. I didn't have to sell him on it. Mick had a built-in detector for bureaucratic nonsense. He just nodded slowly, his eyes scanning the forgery. "The signature's a joke," he grunted, taking a sip of his coffee. "But a signed document in a file is enough to give them cover. They know that." He pulled out a rugged city-issued laptop. "Let's see what the eye in the sky says." He typed for a few minutes, his fingers moving with practiced efficiency. On the screen, a satellite map of my neighborhood appeared. With a few clicks, he overlaid the official county parcel data from 5 years ago. My property was a perfect, clean rectangle. There was no easement, no notch cut out of the back. It was just a fact, written in digital lines that couldn't be forged. "There it is," he said, pointing. "Or rather, there it isn't. According to the city's historical data, That easement never existed. They filed it last year using that piece of garbage as proof of a prior agreement. This was the first concrete piece of ammunition I had. The truth, backed by the city's own records. That night, I moved from data to surveillance. I bought 3 motion-activated trail cams, the kind hunters use. After dark, I slipped out and mounted them on trees overlooking the construction site, their camouflage casings blending perfectly with the bark. I didn't have to wait long. 2 nights later, one of the cameras sent an alert to my phone. I watched the grainy, green-tinged footage. At 2 a.m, a contractor's truck, with no company markings, rolled silently onto the site. A single figure got out, a young guy I recognized from Connie's newsletters as her nephew, the one who'd conveniently just started his own construction business. I watched as he and another man unloaded forms and began mixing and pouring concrete for foundation slabs, working quickly and quietly in the dark. They were trespassing. They were working without permits for night work, and they were doing it on my land. I saved the video file to a secure drive. The evidence was piling up. Feeling a surge of confidence, I made a tactical error. I decided to reclaim my boundary. I spent a weekend building a new fence, not a flimsy split rail, but a sturdy 6-foot chain-link fence, anchored in concrete, right on my actual property line. It cut off about a third of their construction site. I even rigged it with small, battery-powered tamper alarms. Let them explain why they were trying to cut through a fence on land that wasn't theirs. The response was immediate, not with cutters, but with paper. A courier delivered a court summons. The HOA had filed for an injunction, claiming my unauthorized industrial barrier violated neighborhood sightline rules and was a danger to the community. They were using the law against me to enforce their own lawlessness. That's when the hope I'd been clinging to started to fray. It felt like trying to fight a flood with a bucket. For every truth I uncovered, they built a bigger dam of lies. For every step forward I took, they used their fake authority to push me 2 steps back. Laura called, her voice trembling. "Dad, they're threatening foreclosure now. They put a lien on the house for the unpaid fines. You have to stop. I can't watch this." A week later, she packed an overnight bag and moved in with a friend from the hospital. "I can't stay here, Dad. I'm too scared of what they'll do next." The empty space she left in the house was a physical ache. The whispers in the neighborhood grew louder. The HOA held a special meeting, and I later heard from Sam the mailman that Connie told everyone I was having a breakdown, that my grief had made me paranoid and aggressive. I was completely and utterly alone, a prisoner in my own home. My professional life, my neighbors, even my own daughter, all of it was being stripped away. The pressure was immense, a physical weight that made it hard to breathe. One afternoon, I couldn't take it anymore. I drove to the small cemetery on the edge of town and walked to Mary's grave. I sat on the grass beside the simple headstone and just broke. The frustration, the loneliness, the crushing sense of injustice, it all came pouring out. I told her about the orchard, about the concrete, about the lies. I put my head in my hands, and the fight just went out of me. "I don't know what to do, Mayor," I whispered to the cold granite. "They won't listen. They don't care it was your garden. They just want the power." And as I said the word, something clicked. Power. That's all this was ever about. It wasn't about a hotel or property values. It was about Connie's need to dominate, to control, to win. And I had been playing a defensive game, reacting to her moves, trying to prove I was right. That was the wrong strategy. You don't prove yourself to a bully. You remove them from the board. A new thought, cold and sharp and clear, cut through the grief. I stood up, my back straight. I knew who I needed to call. Back at my office, I looked up a number for an old friend from my Army days, a man who ran one of the biggest demolition and licensing firms in the state. He picked up on the second ring. "Jack Harlan," he boomed. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" I got straight to it. "Hypothetical question," I said. "If an unauthorized structure is built on my private property, using fraudulent permits based on forged documents, do I have the right to remove it?" There was a pause on the other end. I could hear him smiling. "Hell yes, Jack," he said, his voice dropping into a professional calm. "If you can prove the land is yours and the permits are invalid, then it's not their building. It's your problem, and you have every right to clear your problem off your land." The phone call changed everything. The fog of despair and helplessness burned away, leaving behind the cold, clean lines of a mission objective. I wasn't a homeowner fighting a faceless board anymore. I was a demolition expert with a hazardous, unauthorized structure on my property. My training took over. For the next 3 weeks, I was a ghost. I operated while the construction crew was off-site, in the pre-dawn hours and late at night. The work was methodical, silent, and precise. This wasn't about anger anymore. It was about engineering. First, I conducted my own site reconnaissance. I didn't trust their blueprints or the permits they had flashed around. I spent hours with a measuring wheel and a laser level, creating a detailed map of the structure as it currently stood. I cross-referenced it with the drone footage I'd been collecting. Every support beam, every load-bearing wall, every concrete slab was documented. Next, I mapped the utilities. I made the official call before you dig request under my company's name for the entire parcel, not just their little construction zone. The city sent out technicians who marked the gas lines, water mains, sewer pipes, and electrical conduits with bright spray paint and little flags. The construction foreman shot me a dirty look when he saw the sea of colored lines the next morning. But there was nothing he could do. It was a standard safety procedure. For me, it was a strike plan. I knew exactly where to cut and, more importantly, where not to. The most critical step was the paperwork. I wasn't going to make the same mistake they did. My case had to be ironclad, sealed in a vault of legal and procedural perfection. I took a day off and went to my company's insurance broker. I didn't just renew my liability insurance. I took out a special multi-million-dollar policy rider for a high-risk demolition. I formally declared the half-built hotel on my property as an unauthorized and hazardous structure posing a significant liability risk. Getting it officially classified as a hazard was the key. It was no longer a simple building. It was a problem that my insurance company now had a vested interest in seeing removed safely. While I was quietly laying the groundwork, Connie Haverford and her board were getting louder. They were high on their own power, convinced they had already won. To celebrate their inevitable victory, they planned a community fundraiser and press event. They sent out glossy flyers to every home in the neighborhood, announcing the groundbreaking ceremony for the Haverford Lodge, complete with an artist's rendering of the finished project, sitting squarely on my land. The event was held on a Saturday afternoon. They set up a white tent, served cheap champagne in plastic flutes, and invited a reporter from the local paper. I watched from my kitchen window, my fists clenched. Connie stood at a podium, beaming, her voice amplified by a portable speaker. "This beautiful new lodge is a testament to what we can achieve when we come together as a community," she chirped. The board members behind her clapped like trained seals. Then she delivered the line that sealed her fate. "We owe a special thanks to our generous community donors whose contributions made this all possible. Donors like our own Jack Harlan, whose land donation forms the very foundation of this project." My blood ran cold. The sheer audacity was breathtaking. She was using my name, my reputation, to legitimize her theft in front of the entire neighborhood. I didn't yell. I didn't storm over there. I simply raised my phone, which was already recording video, and captured her entire speech. They even posted a picture on the HOA's Facebook page later that day. A photo of Connie at the podium with the caption thanking me by name. I saved a screenshot. It was the final piece of evidence I needed. The following Monday morning, I walked into the city planning department. I wasn't Jack Harlan, the angry homeowner. I was Jack Harlan, owner and lead engineer of Harlan Demolition, Inc. I was there to file a standard permit application. The clerk, a tired-looking woman named Brenda, whom I'd known for years, looked up over her glasses. "Big job, Jack?" she asked. "Just a cleanup," I said, sliding the thick folder across the counter. It was all there. I wasn't filing a complaint. I was filing a professional proposal to remove a hazard. The application included my company's license, our insurance bond, and the new liability rider. Attached to it, in neatly organized appendices, was the evidence. Appendix A. The official county surveyor's report, commissioned by me, confirming my property lines with modern GPS coordinates. Appendix B. The satellite data from Mick's office showing no easement existed prior to the fraudulent filing. Appendix C. A certified forensic document examiner's report stating unequivocally that the signature on the HOA's easement was a forgery. Appendix D. time-stamped footage from my trail cams showing Connie's nephew trespassing and working illegally after hours. Appendix E. An environmental impact report from a geologist I'd hired showing that their unauthorized foundation had been poured directly over a sensitive soil area, a clear violation of city codes. And finally, Appendix F. A printout of the HOA's Facebook post and the video of Connie's speech, proving they were publicly and knowingly attributing a fraudulent act to me. Brenda's eyes widened as she thumbed through the file. She wasn't reading a simple permit request. She was reading the script of a heist. She didn't say a word. She just stamped the application as received and said, "The board reviews these on Wednesday. We'll let you know." I didn't have to wait long. The call came on Thursday afternoon. It wasn't the review board. It was the head of the department himself. "Mr. Harlan," he said, his voice strained, "we've reviewed your application and the supporting documentation. The permits issued for that construction have been retroactively voided due to material fraud. Your demolition permit is approved, effective immediately." It was approved, quietly, no fanfare, no fight. Just the simple, clean logic of a system that had been presented with overwhelming, undeniable truth. I thanked him, hung up the phone, and took a deep, steadying breath. I looked at the calendar on my wall, and I circled this coming Sunday in red. Sunday morning arrived not with the gentle ringing of church bells, but with the low thrum of diesel engines and the squeak of heavy-duty suspension. At precisely 6 a.m., two of my company's flatbed trucks rolled down the street, followed by my crew cab. We didn't make a racket. My crew, a team of seasoned pros I'd worked with for 15 years, operated with the quiet efficiency of a surgical team. They were in full gear, hard hats, steel-toed boots, high-visibility vests, unloading safety cones, and rolls of yellow. Caution tape. They established a 200-foot perimeter around the half-built structure, cordoning off the street access. Neighbors started to peek out from behind their curtains, drawn by the unusual sight of flashing amber lights on a peaceful weekend morning. This wasn't the chaotic mess of the HOA's contractors. This was an organized, professional operation. We were setting up for a job, and the job was erasure. It took less than an hour for the enemy to notice. A sleek black SUV came screaming around the corner, slamming to a halt just inches from the yellow tape. Connie Haverford burst out of the driver's side, dressed in an expensive-looking tennis outfit, her face a mask of pure rage. Two of her bored cronies scrambled out of the passenger side, looking bewildered. "What in God's name do you think you're doing, Harlan?" she shrieked, her voice cracking. "This is an active construction site. You are trespassing. I'm calling the police." I walked calmly to the edge of the perimeter, a manila folder in my hand. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't have to. "Morning, Connie," I said, my voice level. "First, you're the one trespassing. This is my property. Second, the only construction happening here today is a demolition. And third, please do call the police. It'll save me a phone call." I slid 2 documents out of the folder and handed them to the foreman on my crew, who stepped forward to meet her. He was a big guy named Sal who didn't get rattled by much, especially not by suburban tyrants. "Ma'am," Sal said, holding out the papers, "this is a legally issued demolition permit from the city, and this is a court order affirming the property line and authorizing the removal of the unauthorized structure." Connie just stared at the papers, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. This is fake! This is fraudulent! You can't do this!" she sputtered, her voice rising to a fever pitch. I checked my watch. "You have 15 minutes to evacuate any personnel you might have inside the demolition zone. After that, we can't guarantee your safety." She and her friends just laughed, a shrill, ugly sound. "We're not going anywhere. And when the police get here, you'll be the one in handcuffs." Right on cue, a police cruiser rolled up, its lights off. 2 officers got out, their expressions tired and wary. Connie ran toward them, pointing a trembling finger at me. "Officer, thank God you're here. This man is a menace. He's threatening to blow up our community center." The senior officer ignored her, walking directly to me. "Mr. Harlan, we got a call from the city dispatcher confirming your operation today. Just here to keep the peace. Is everything in order?" I nodded. "Everything's on schedule, officer. We're just clearing the site now." The officer turned to a sputtering Connie. "Ma'am, the court order is valid. You and your friends are on private. A. Property, and you are interfering with illegal and permitted demolition. You need to move back behind the safety line immediately. The color drained from Connie's face. For the first time, she looked completely and utterly powerless. The system she had expertly manipulated had turned against her. Defeated, she and her cronies shuffled back behind the tape, joining the growing crowd of neighbors who had gathered to watch the spectacle. A few of them were already holding up their phones, recording. I walked to my station, a small table with the detonation control unit. I did one last radio check with my team. Perimeter secure? Secure, Sal's voice crackled back. Charges set? All set and verified. I picked up the remote detonator. It was a simple black box with a covered red button. I looked across the muddy field, past the skeletal frame of their monument to greed, and my eyes met Connie's. Her face was a storm of disbelief and hatred. Then, from the back of the crowd, I heard a voice start the countdown. It was Bob from across the street. 10, 9, 8. A few other voices joined in, tentative at first, then growing louder. They were counting with me. 7, 6, 5. The community she had terrorized was now the chorus for her downfall. I placed my thumb on the button. 4, 3, 2, 1. I pressed the button. There wasn't a giant Hollywood explosion. There was a series of sharp percussive cracks, like a string of firecrackers. For a split second, the building stood perfectly still. Then, with a deep groaning rumble, it began to fold in on itself. The walls collapsed inward, the roof trusses snapped, and the entire structure fell into its own footprint in a cloud of dust and splintered wood. It took less than 20 seconds. When the dust began to settle, there was nothing left but a pile of neatly contained rubble, right where the orchard used to be. The silence that followed was absolute. Then one person started to clap, then another, and another. Soon, the entire street was filled with the sound of cheering and applause. That's what broke Connie. With a wild scream, she ducked under the tape and charged at me, her face contorted with insane fury. "You monster!" she shrieked, clawing at me, trying to grab the detonator from my hand, as if she could undo what had just been done. My foreman, Sal, intercepted her easily, grabbing her arms while the police officers rushed in. But it was too late. The whole thing, her desperate, pathetic attack, was captured on a dozen different phones. A neighbor I'd never spoken to before, a young guy with a smartphone, had been live streaming the whole thing. He turned the camera on me as the police escorted a hysterical Connie away. I looked directly into the lens, my face calm, my voice steady and clear for everyone watching. "You built a hotel on my land," I said, "so I reclaimed it, permanently." The video went viral. Before my crew had even finished clearing the first truckload of debris. By Sunday night, HOA Karen Gets Owned by Demolition Man was trending. The clip of Connie's frantic attack, juxtaposed with the calm, controlled collapse of her illegal hotel, was perfect television. Local news channels picked it up, then national outlets. My quiet life was over, but so was Connie Haverford's reign of terror. Facing a tidal wave of public humiliation, the HOA board panicked. They announced an emergency community meeting for Tuesday night in the school gymnasium. The agenda item was singular, a vote to censure me for endangering the community and destroying HOA assets. It was a desperate last-ditch effort to regain control of the narrative, to paint me as the villain one last time. They still didn't understand the kind of war they were in. They thought it was about public opinion. I knew it was about facts. On Tuesday night, the gym was packed. It felt like the whole neighborhood had turned out, buzzing with nervous energy. The HOA board sat at a long table on the stage, looking grim. Connie was in the center, her face pale but her expression defiant. She was flanked by her lawyer. I didn't come alone. I arrived with my own team. Mick Alvarez sat in the front row, holding a file. Next to him was the certified surveyor who had mapped my property. And a few rows back, a local investigative reporter I'd spoken to, a sharp young woman named Sarah, sat with a cameraman. The room fell silent as I walked in. I took a seat in the front, directly opposite the board. I didn't say a word. I just waited. Connie began the meeting, her voice tight with forced composure. She spoke of community, of shared values, of progress. She called the hotel project a dream for the neighborhood and painted me as a disgruntled, dangerous man who had taken the law into his own hands. Mr. Harlan's reckless actions have cost this community millions of dollars and put our families at risk, she concluded, her voice trembling with synthetic outrage. Tonight, we must stand together and vote to censure him, to show that we will not tolerate this kind of lawless vigilantism. When she finished, a tense silence filled the gym. Then, the moderator, a nervous-looking board member, asked if there were any comments from the floor before the vote. I stood up. I didn't go to the microphone set up in the aisle. I walked directly to the front of the stage, turned, and faced my neighbors. "My name is Jack Harlan," I began, my voice calm and steady, needing no amplification in the quiet room. "For the last 3 months, Mrs. Haverford and her board have told you I'm unstable. They've told you I'm a liar. They've told you I'm a threat. Tonight, I'm just going to show you the truth." I turned to the surveyor. "Mr. Evans, could you please show the residents the official property lines for parcel 7A? He stood and unfurled a massive, professionally printed map showing my property as a clear, unbroken rectangle. The Haverford Lodge was a red-shaded box sitting 50 feet inside my boundary. A low murmur went through the crowd. "Now," I continued, "Mrs. Haverford has claimed I donated this land. Her proof is a signed easement." I pulled a document from my folder and placed it on an overhead projector Sarah's cameraman had set up. The clumsy forged signature filled the screen behind the board. "This is the document the HOA filed. I hired a forensic expert to analyze it." I projected the expert's report next to it, with the conclusion highlighted in yellow. "The signature is a crude simulation, conclusively not genuine." The murmurs grew louder. People were shifting in their seats, turning to look at Connie, whose face had gone rigid. "The HOA then proceeded to build on my land illegally," I said, my voice hardening. "They hired Mrs. Haverford's nephew, who worked in the middle of the night to hide his actions." I nodded to Mick. A moment later, the video from the trail cam played on the screen. Connie's nephew, clear as day, trespassing and pouring concrete. Gasps rippled through the audience. People were standing up now, pointing at the board. "They did all of this," I said, my voice rising, "while lying to you. They told you this project was for your benefit, to raise your property values, but they were financing it with your HOA dues while committing fraud." This was my final move. I pulled one last document from my folder. It was a letter I had received that morning, forwarded from Mick's contacts in the State Insurance Commission. "This is a notice of cancellation for the HOA's liability and director's insurance policy," I announced, holding it up. "Their insurer has dropped them, effective immediately, due to findings of willful misconduct and fraudulent activity. This board has not only exposed every one of you to a massive financial loss, they've left this entire community uninsured." It was like a bomb had gone off in the room. The illusion of power and authority shattered in an instant. The board members stared at the paper in my hand, their faces ashen. They were exposed, naked. Bob from across the street was the first to speak. He stood up, his face red with anger. "I make a motion," he yelled, his voice booming through the gym. "I make a motion to dissolve this board, right now." A roar of approval shook the room. The moderator, seeing the tide turn with absolute finality, had no choice. He stammered, all in favor?" Nearly every hand in the gym shot up. Connie Haverford just sat there, frozen, as the foundation of her little kingdom crumbled around her. Sarah, the reporter, was already at her side, her microphone in Connie's face. Chased by shouted questions and the fury of her neighbors, Connie stumbled off the stage and fled out a side door, her reign over. The meeting ended with the community appointing a new interim president, a retired electrician named George, a man I'd seen argue with Connie about nonsensical lighting regulations a year ago. He walked over to me as the crowd began to disperse and stuck out a thick, calloused hand. "I don't like paperwork bullies either," he said with a grim smile. I shook his hand. It was the first time a neighbor had willingly touched me in months. The battle was over, but the war for peace had just begun. In the weeks that followed the community meeting, the fallout was swift and absolute. Connie, in a final, delusional act of arrogance, tried to sue me for defamation of character and the destruction of her multi-million-dollar asset. The legal papers arrived via courier, thick with blustering threats and baseless accusations. My lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman who had been watching the news coverage with a grim sort of satisfaction, just laughed when she read the summons. "This isn't a lawsuit, Jack," she told me over the phone. "It's a temper tantrum on paper. Let's give her a real fight. We didn't just respond, we countersued, but not for money. We sued for a legal declaration that the easement was fraudulent, and we filed a separate criminal complaint with the district attorney's office for forgery. The evidence I had compiled was so overwhelming that Connie's lawyer dropped her as a client within a week. The district attorney pressed charges a month later. The system, once armed with the truth, moved with surprising speed. The consequences rippled outward. The city, now facing scrutiny from the press, launched its own investigation into the Haverford Lodge project. Connie's nephew saw his business license suspended. His company was hit with a $250,000 fine for the unpermitted work, the environmental violations, and fraudulent permit applications. He had built his business on his aunt's corruption, and when she fell, he was dragged down into the rubble with her. Back in the neighborhood, the change was profound. The fear that had hung over us for years began to dissipate. The new interim board, led by George the electrician, moved quickly. Their first act was to hire an independent auditor to go through years of the HOA's finances. What they found was a slush fund of our dues being funneled to Connie's preferred contractors and legal fees for her personal vendettas. Their second act was to rewrite the bylaws. No more secret board meetings. Any expenditure over $5,000 required a full community vote. Fines could be appealed to a committee of residents, not just the board. They were dismantling Connie's kingdom, brick by brick, and handing the power back to the people it belonged to. About 2 months after the demolition, a for sale sign appeared on Connie Haverford's lawn. There was no grand exit. One Saturday, a moving truck pulled up, and by evening, it was gone. I watched from my window as she drove away in her sedan. Not looking back, she just vanished, a ghost chased out of town by the truth she could no longer outrun. With the legal battles winding down and the silence of peace returning, my focus shifted back to my land. I brought my crew in one last time. We spent a weekend clearing the rubble, grinding the concrete foundation into recyclable aggregate, and hauling it all away. We scraped the scarred earth clean, leveling the ground until there was no trace that the Haverford Lodge had ever existed. That Sunday evening, as I stood looking at the empty patch of land, a familiar car pulled into my driveway. It was Laura. She got out, and for a moment, we just stood there, 50 feet apart. Then she ran to me, wrapping her arms around my waist, and I held her tight. "I'm so sorry, Dad," she whispered into my chest. "I was so scared of what they could do that I forgot what you can do." I just held her. "It's okay," I said. "You were trying to protect me." We stood there for a long time, watching the sun set over the empty field. "What are you going to do with it now?" she asked quietly. "I'm going to replant it," I said. "Every single tree." And we did. The following weekend, Laura was there with me. We bought new saplings, apple, pear, and a single cherry tree. We spent the day digging, planting, and watering, our hands covered in the rich soil. It felt like we weren't just planting trees, we were planting a future. As we finished, Laura had an idea. "You know, Dad," she said, wiping a smudge of dirt from her cheek, "a lot of the young vets I see at the hospital, they're lost. They have skills, discipline, but they don't know where to put it. You could teach them, right here." A new purpose began to take shape, something built not from anger, but from a desire to create. We decided to start a small, hands-on mentorship program for veterans transitioning back to civilian life. We'd teach them skilled trades, demolition, framing, plumbing, real work that builds things up, instead of just tearing them down. A few weeks later, after the last sapling was in the ground, I installed a simple wooden bench near the center of the new orchard. I had a small brass plaque engraved and attached it to the backrest. It just said, "Mary's Orchard, reclaimed and replanted." I walk the fence line now, sometimes in the morning with my coffee, my hands tucked in my pockets. The new fence is strong, the new trees are taking root. My daughter is home, the neighborhood is quiet, run by sensible people who believe in talking over fences, not hiding behind rules. Connie Haverford and her board thought power came from a title on a letterhead, from a clipboard and a list of violations. They thought they could create it with lies and enforce it with fear. I stood on my land, on the ground I had cleared and reclaimed, and looked out at the peaceful community. They thought power was something you take. I showed them what it really looks like when you earn it.